And this is internal managerial accounting, something we use internally, and a lot of manufacturing companies use this to make decisions. And so it's really important as we go through here that you are beginning to be very, very comfortable with the terminology that we use. So we have beginning inventory, and we have units produced. And so again, if you don't know what we mean by this terminology, you need to go back and review. We have units sold, we have units in ending inventory. And again, just keeping up with what we do as we work through this. If we have 250, we started with 0, we produced 250, and if we sell 225, then how many do we have left over? 25. And that seems real simple, but when we start going through this and using the data, sometimes people get confused. Now we're going to look at our variable cost per unit. And if you remember from previous chapters, we have direct materials, we have direct labor, and we have variable manufacturing overhead. We also have variable selling and administrative. So this is not a production cost, but it is a variable cost. And so make sure you know what you're calculating and what you're using. And so in variable costing, we want to make sure we have all of this information in front of us. And just using some random numbers here to help us talk about this new type of internal managerial accounting. And then we have our fixed cost, and we have our fixed manufacturing overhead, and we have our fixed selling and administrative, just like we have with our variable. Now remember, fixed within a relevant range, and so typically within a year we can't change this. So we have $60,000 for manufacturing overhead, and we have $20,000 for selling and administrative. Now let's calculate the unit product cost using this data, but let's calculate it two different ways. Let's calculate it using absorption costing, which is what we've been doing so far this semester, and then let's do it by calculating variable costing. So the unit product cost. Now keep in mind what I'm doing up here, unit product cost. Okay, so under absorption costing, we would take our direct material cost, our direct labor cost, our variable manufacturing overhead, and our fixed manufacturing overhead. Now I did not pull in selling and administrative, either variable or fixed, because those are period costs. And those are not attached to the product. Remember, we expense those in the period in which they are incurred. We're looking at product costs, so it's product versus period. And so we know that our direct material is 100, our direct labor is 320, our variable manufacturing overhead is 40. Now what about our fixed? Our fixed is 60,000, and do we divide this by what we sold or what we produced? Well, let's think about that. If it's manufacturing overhead, it's what we produced. It has actually nothing to do with what we sold. Now, if it was selling and administrative, it might be, but this is based on what we produce. So we divide that by our 250, and we come up with our absorption costing. So our unit product cost using absorption costing is $700. Now, variable costing, we take our direct material, our direct labor, and our variable manufacturing overheads. We do not take our fixed because that is by definition not part of the cost that we want to calculate. So we come down here and calculate that, and we come up with $460 as our variable variable product cost. And now I want to take this same information and I want to figure out, under my absorption costing, how much fixed overhead is included in the company's inventory. Okay, so how many units do I have in inventory? I have 25. And what is my fixed manufacturing overhead per unit? It's 240. So if I want to know, my question is, how much fixed manufacturing overhead is in ending inventory? And I have a reason for this. And so I would take my per unit times my number of units in ending inventory, and I would come up with $6,000. Okay, so I've got that information, and now I'm going to continue with this problem, same data, and I'm going to do an income statement, and I'm going to use absorption costing. This is what we use according to generally accepted accounting principles. And so let's say that my sales, I sold 225 units, and so let's say my sales are 191,250. And my cost of goods sold, go ahead and add that my sales per unit was 850. My cost of goods sold, I sold 225 units. And under absorption costing, my cost per unit is 700. So my cost of goods sold is 157,500. That gives me a gross margin of my sales minus my cost of goods sold. And then I subtract from that my selling and administrative expenses. And my selling and administrative expenses, we can calculate that. And the way we would calculate that is we have our fixed selling administrative expenses plus we sold 225 and our variable selling and administrative is $20 per unit. And so we come up with 24,500, which gives us an operating income of, and again, this is a very basic income statement, but it's necessary for you to see the difference in absorption and variable costing. Okay, so this is using my absorption costing, and now I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to copy this over so I don't have to retype everything, except this time I'm going to use variable costing. Now remember, we use variable costing internally. And so when we do that, we have to reconcile our income statement to absorption, which is what we publish externally according to generally accepted accounting principles. So my cost of goods sold for variable costing is going to be different. And it's going to be different because, and I'm actually going to show you kind of how this looks. I'm not going to use, I copied this over so you could see it. Now I'm going to show you what's different. So what we do is we take our variable expenses, and so we have our direct material, and you don't have to separate these, direct labor, variable manufacturing overhead, and that gives us our total variable expenses. Now, what happens after you subtract sales minus variable expenses or variable cost? You have contribution margin. And then we have our fixed expenses. And fixed, we have fixed manufacturing overhead. We have selling and administrative. And from that, we have our operating income. And I actually need to move all this down because I forgot my selling and administrative. I guess I should be consistent and put admin. Okay. So again, kind of wanted you to see what that looks like. Now, on our income statement, with our variable expenses, we have our direct material, which is $100 per unit. And it's similar to our cost of goods sold, because we base it on our number of units sold. So our direct materials would be the 100 minus the number of units sold. Direct labor would be our 320 times the number of units sold. Variable manufacturing overhead would be my 40 times the number of units sold. And selling and administrative would be my 20 times the number of units sold. Okay, then I have my total variable expenses. And then I have my contribution margin, which is my sales minus my variable expenses. Now, hopefully you see at this point why we use this internally, because now we have this set up in a format where we can use our our cost volume profit analysis and this contribution margin income statement to make decisions. So our fixed manufacturing overhead is $60,000. Our fixed selling and administrative, that is $20,000. Now Notice we didn't do by unit as we did before because now we're using variable costing. And so then our operating income is our contribution margin minus our fixed manufacturing overhead minus our fixed selling and administrative. Now, I want you to see the difference in my operating income using absorption costing as opposed to using variable costing. Now remember, we use variable costing internally, we use absorption costing externally. That's according to generally accepted accounting principles. So I have to show a reconciliation between the two. And so what I have to do is I have to count for fixed manufacturing overhead and inventory. Now we calculated that number right here. So if I take these two and add them together, I have reconciled to my generally accepted accounting principles absorption costing method. So we use this internally to make decisions. We use this externally to follow guidelines, but we have to reconcile the two by looking at our fixed manufacturing overhead and inventory.